Napoleon is one of the most controversial and multifaceted figures in all of world history. On the one hand, in school textbooks he is often portrayed as a short tyrant obsessed with delusions of grandeur, who supposedly did nothing but unleash endless wars, spreading chaos across Europe and beyond. On the other hand, it was he who created the famous Napoleonic Code, a body of laws, many provisions of which, incidentally, remain in force in France to this day, more than 2 centuries later. Under his leadership, a colossal empire emerged, stretching from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the cold waters of the North Sea, and a significant part of Europe fell under French control or direct influence. Could a man depicted as a mad dwarf truly achieve such grand accomplishments? There is an obvious contradiction here, and to finally dot all the I's, it is best to try to look at that era through the eyes of an ordinary subject of Napoleon, a simple person living in those turbulent times. That is exactly what we will attempt to do in the coming minutes. Meet our guest today, Antoine Duval. The name was chosen deliberately. It is quite typical for the French of that period and helps highlight certain features of the policy pursued by Napoleon. Antoine was born in French Guiana, a distant colony in South America which, by the way, remains an overseas department of France even today. In the 18th century, it was a typical colony where life was harsh and full of hardship. Nevertheless, Antoine's parents, like many other French colonists, preferred difficult but relatively peaceful work on sugar cane plantations to the constant wars and revolutionary chaos that raged in their continental homeland. However, with Napoleon's rise to power, everything changed dramatically. Even as first consul, not yet emperor, Napoleon launched a truly titanic effort to restore the country's devastated economy. He imposed price controls, opened numerous schools and military academies throughout France, and reformed administration and finance. And in 1804, the famous Napoleonic Code was adopted, which truly transformed the lives of millions. After the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789 and until its end in 1799, despite the overthrow of the monarchy and the proclamation of a republic, the situation of ordinary citizens remained extremely difficult and confusing. In different regions of the country, completely different legal systems were applied. In some places Roman law prevailed, in others Germanic customary law. Republican officials made desperate attempts to create something new, but their efforts drowned in enormous multi-volume codes with vague and contradictory wording that no one could properly enforce. Add to this the church, which openly ignored state decrees and refused to return lands to peasants that they had already bought from landlords, and you get a picture of complete legal chaos and lawlessness. Napoleon decisively took the situation into his own hands, establishing strict control and creating a unified, coherent system of laws for the entire country. The crown of this work was the Napoleonic Code, one of the most refined and influential legal documents in human history. First, it completely abolished estate privileges and inequality. From then on, all French citizens were equal before the law, and positions and ranks were distributed solely according to merit, talent, and ability, not noble birth. Second, Napoleon significantly limited the influence of the church. Most church lands were confiscated in favor of the state and then transferred into private ownership to small landowners and peasants. At the same time, the very concept of private property received reliable legal protection and became inviolable. In short, before 1804, an ordinary person could work their entire life for the church, giving up a significant part of their harvest, and moving to a city for a good job was almost impossible. All desirable positions were taken by people with the right connections among the old nobility. After the adoption of the code, everything changed. Equality before the law became a reality, and new opportunities for social mobility opened up. Of course, the code had its shortcomings. For example, it significantly reduced the rights of women in the family and in society, but overall it was a groundbreaking and progressive document for its time. Thanks to these reforms, thousands of people, including our Antoine, returned from the colonies to continental France in search of freedom, equality, and opportunities for self-realization. Antoine ended up in Paris and enrolled in a military academy, where education was completely free and cadets even received a decent stipend, another achievement of Napoleon, who considered education and officer training a matter of state importance. Antoine successfully graduated, and now it is May 1812. He holds the rank of lieutenant and commands a small artillery detachment stationed in Poland, right on the border with the Russian Empire. You understand, of course, that we are on the eve of the Patriotic War of 1812. But we want to show the situation from the French side and explain why Antoine and hundreds of thousands of other Frenchmen willingly went to this war. The vast majority of the French sincerely idolized Napoleon, at least for the order that had finally been established in the country after decades of revolutionary chaos. People valued a stable economy, good wages, reforms, genuine civil freedoms, and equality of opportunity. For this, they even forgave the emperor for introducing compulsory military service. And there was indeed somewhere to serve and something to fight for. From 1803 to 1811, the French army had effectively conquered almost all of Europe, yielding only to Britain thanks to its island position. Military service was associated with victories, glory, loot, and material prosperity. Therefore, in 1812 Antoine gladly served in the so-called Grand Army. As we have already said, he was a lieutenant serving in the 3rd Corps under the command of the famous Marshal Ney. The name Grand Army was well deserved. Its ranks numbered about 390,000 men, and only about half of them were ethnic French. The rest were Poles, an entire corps of 40,000 bayonets, Prussians, Italians, Spaniards, Croats, even Austrians. Such incredible multinational diversity was precisely the result of Napoleon's policy. He was one of the first in history to understand the power of propaganda and public relations. The emperor staged grand parades even for minor occasions, won brilliant victories, and most importantly, managed to instill in all of Europe the idea that it was better not to confront the French on the battlefield. Hence the willingness of foreigners to serve the empire. Of course, Britain continued to condemn Napoleon and actively formed anti-French coalitions. Russia's refusal to join the continental blockade of Britain, as well as Napoleon's unwillingness to compromise on territorial issues, became one of the main causes of the War of 1812. But for Antoine, all this was secondary. He commanded a small but excellently equipped artillery detachment, modern field howitzers with bronze barrels decorated with elegant engravings. Such guns are still preserved in Russian museums not only as trophies but also as examples of the high craftsmanship of Napoleonic artillery. Antoine's uniform was also impressive, the classic blue and white coat that throughout Europe was simply called French. In the Grand Army there was a strict and well-thought-out system of insignia. For example, the famous tall shakos with feathers were adorned with pom-poms of different colors. The color indicated the company number. On the front of the shako was placed the symbol of the branch, for artillerymen, crossed cannons. So, seeing a soldier with a saber at his belt, a light blue pom-pom on his shako, and the number 3, one could immediately understand, before you stands an infantryman of the 2nd Company of the 3rd Battalion. Convenient and practical, comrades were identified instantly on the battlefield. The time of medieval wars had long passed, and Antoine well understood the importance of hygiene. He personally monitored cleanliness and demanded the same from his subordinates. In tent camps, latrines were always arranged, soldiers regularly washed their uniforms. Everyone understood that the army's main enemy was not the enemy's bullet, but wet feet, dirty clothes, and the diseases that spread from them. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about medicine of that time. In the early 19th century, the most common operation among field surgeons remained amputation, and even that often became a death sentence due to infections. Antoine was lucky, but he saw hundreds and thousands of mutilated, armless, legless comrades, as well as those who died from simple wounds, gangrene, or typhus. The official statistics of the Russian campaign speak for themselves. About 100,000 were killed in battle, and another 224,000 died from wounds, disease, and exhaustion. Therefore, Antoine feared not so much Russian bayonets and bullets as these silent killers. Nevertheless, the Grand Army entered Russia in high spirits. It was not only faith in Napoleon's genius and excellent equipment. Money played a decisive role. Napoleon perfectly understood that financial motivation was key. Antoine's salary was 125 francs per month plus 2 francs per day while on campaign. For a lieutenant, that was very respectable money. Napoleon actively introduced the decimal system of weights and measures and also streamlined the monetary system, no more, 13.5 pence per ounce. France moved to convenient 10 centimes per franc, and so on. With 125 francs per month, roughly 4 francs per day, in Paris in 1812 one could buy about 5 kilograms of meat, 40 eggs, 5 liters of wine, or 10 kilograms of flour. An ordinary soldier received 5 times less, but even that was enough to feed himself and his family normally. 30 kilograms of meat per month sounds quite decent. And Antoine, after a couple of years of service, could easily save for a small house, and after several years, even for a modest estate with tenants. However, there was an important catch. Once meeting Marshal Soult in Spain, Napoleon uttered a famous phrase, "War must feed war." In simple terms, this meant that the army had to provide for itself. Salaries, weapons, uniforms, all of this the army had to obtain independently. How? Very simply, fight, win, conclude peace treaties with huge indemnities, collect taxes from conquered territories, conduct requisitions. After Austerlitz in 1805, Napoleon even freed the army from reporting to the state treasury. It had its own treasury, where all reparations and income from plunder flowed. From this treasury, bonuses were paid, and even an ordinary soldier could count on a substantial reward for bravery. The system was relatively fair. But the irony of fate was that after the first successful campaigns, Napoleon faced a new problem. Enriched soldiers returned home and no longer wanted to work, and there was nothing to pay them if war did not bring new income. Therefore, the emperor constantly sent the army on new campaigns. Even if somewhere a final victory had been achieved, the opportunity for Antoine to spend his savings would have remained largely theoretical. He most likely would simply have been transferred to Egypt, the Middle East, or another campaign. In the end, Antoine fell into a classic trap with which states have lured people for centuries. They promise bonuses, privileges, and glory, but in reality the benefit is minimal. What can be said in conclusion? Antoine did not regret his choice at all. He voluntarily served in Napoleon's army, was well equipped, and the soldiers were cared for at a level that was among the highest for that era. But the trouble was that Napoleon, being an outstanding ruler and reformer at home, never managed to switch to peaceful development. Constant wars and the need to maintain a gigantic army proved unbearable for France. The emperor's imperial ambitions combined with financial difficulties ultimately destroyed both the empire and many of its loyal sons. You know perfectly well how it all ended. The empire collapsed, Napoleon was overthrown, and for a long time his name was dragged through the mud. Yes, he was far from perfect, made mistakes and committed crimes, but he was never a bloodthirsty tyrant on a planetary scale. He does not even rank among the top 20 most cruel rulers in history. Napoleon was not any kind of dwarf either, that is simply a myth. He became a victim of his own ambitions, and along with him many people like Antoine, who sincerely believed in the greatness and strength of France. Although by 1812 there were fewer and fewer reasons left for such faith. Until next time, friends. Antoine wishes you all the very best.